All right, well, thank you for joining our presentation on post-occupancy evaluations. I am the Net Zero Fellow with Holst Architecture, and I'm here with Corey, my colleague, who's the Sustainability Director at Holst. And we've presented this research at a couple local community events in the past couple of weeks, and the conversation following the presentation has been really valuable. So as Kelly mentioned, we're hoping to present for about an hour, but then leave ample amount of time for a conversation. So today, the presentation is more or less 3 parts. So the first part is just an overall introduction into post-occupancy evaluations, which I'll refer to as POEs mostly going forward. And then the second part is our research design overview that we tested on a local housing site in Portland. And then part 3 is a snapshot of our future framework. So recommendations for you all to take away and use for your own projects. All right, so a bit about the research background or landscape and why we think that POEs are so necessary. So you all probably know that we're facing a severe affordable housing crisis. And to meet the affordable housing demand, nationally, over 300,000 units have been produced in the last 5 years. At Holst, we have worked on the design and construction of more than 20 units or 20 projects in the last 5 years as well. And so as we're continuing to do this work, it's a way to step back and evaluate is what we are doing and what we're designing working, and really hearing that perspective from the residents themselves. We find that the current status quo way of working is prioritizing the development of units, which is great, but we don't often take time at the end to look back at our work. So POEs really provide that opportunity, and it's a way to marry the evaluation of the building performance with the resident experience. So housing is considered a major social determinant of health. And if you're not familiar with this term, it's any factor that is outside of the medical interventions that affect a person's well-being. And so because of this, we think it's so important to understand not just how the building is performing, but how the residents are experiencing the building and their perceptions of it. Through this process, we compile a list of lessons learned or design considerations that we can hopefully share with the larger industry and have more conversations about our takeaways from these studies. So the research design that we established for the POE was tested on through a pilot study at a deeply affordable housing site in North Portland. This housing site has gained some media attention recently for some concerns about resident safety, cleanliness, and overall living conditions. And so it was an opportunity for us to revisit this site and understand what exactly, or try to understand what exactly was going on. And then through this research design, we were able to take away the key methods that could be scalable for future POEs and studies at other housing sites. All right, so Corey's going to talk a bit about the site that we studied.
Hi, everybody. So the site, as Maggie mentioned, is the Argyle Gardens. It is in North Portland in the Kenton neighborhood. For those of you familiar with Portland, the Kenton Park is right there, highlighted as number 2. The little train icon on the right is sort of downtown Kenton, where the Paul Bunyan statue is, very famous landmark. It's sort of an interesting periphery between residential, very residential scale development to the lower left of this image and to the south of the property, and industrial development to the north. And it's transitioning some of that industrial land is being now converted to multifamily housing, including this site. Overall, the building overview, it's owned and operated by Transition Projects, which is a housing authority that is really trying to, bring people up out of homelessness. A lot of their mission is geared around that, although they don't have very many properties that they operate. Most of their programs are sort of more administrative. Originally, this was called the LISA, the Low Income Single Adult Housing, because there's not really any family units in it. It's all single room occupant dwelling or sleeping units and a number of studios, and there's one bedroom on site. The overall size is 24,000 square feet, as it says here. The building systems are, this was completed in 2020. The occupants were moving in kind of like during COVID. So this was prior to the heat dome. This is prior to a lot of affordable housing developments, essentially mandating or really needing air conditioning. So this doesn't have air conditioning in the units. There's a little air conditioning in some of the common spaces. The units themselves have essentially just an exhaust fan and electric resistance heat. So that exhaust fan is like 24/7 blowing air out, and the intake air is effectively from the corridor. The water heat is on gas, on demand. Everything else is electric. There is PV array on the rooftop of all the buildings, but for the purposes of our study and sort of the data that I'll cover later, we've excluded that because it's easy to do and it kind of simplifies our analysis. The site plan is seen here. There are 4 buildings on site. The 3 SRO buildings, the single room occupant buildings, are sort of arrayed ABC, and they're oriented east-west. And that orientation is really geared towards maximizing solar exposure on the roof for the solar arrays. The studio building, the longer building there that includes the studio units, most of the common spaces, and the one bedroom that's on site, is oriented sort of to the southwest, to the northeast, mainly because of the way it was all constructed and the way that the kind of the site is configured, and some feedback we got during the design review process from the city of Portland regarding like how the buildings faced and like addressed the street. You can see on the exterior items 2 is like an outdoor common space that is shared amongst the residents. 4 is the bike parking, which we'll show an example of later. 3 is labeled as garden, but that lot sort of behind the development is essentially land banked for potential future development. There's a lot of grade on site too, which is why the lower, like the southern portion of the site is not developed. It's rather steep there. Here you can see some photographs, one on the left looking towards the downtown Kenton area, and the one on the right is from the back looking towards the street and looking towards Kenton Park. You can see here on the right the parking, which is rather limited, and Maggie will discuss some issues with that in a bit. So diving a little closer in, looking more closely at the buildings, this is the plan of the studio building. And on the bottom is the ground floor plan. The pink is common spaces, so like a community room, like a community kitchen. Items 3 and 4 are like laundry spaces and a resident pantry. This is permanent supportive housing, so they have some materials and supplies available for residents should they need them. The blue is all the the studios and the 1 bedrooms. I've added on here an indication that like how the building was constructed. It's modularly constructed, and the way that it lays out for this building is shown here, where there's 4 modules per floor, 3 floors overall, and then the stairways and the corridors were constructed on site between the modules once those are set in place. Here's some photographs of that studio building with a typical studio unit on the left, and then in the sort of the middle lower right is the community space, community kitchen, and on the bottom right is one of the offices for the property management or resident services staff. This SRO buildings, of which there are 3, are all identical, and actually each one of those is 2 floors tall, and the floors are identical. So each floor has 6 SROs, 1 shared kitchen, and a pair of shared bathrooms. Here's some photographs of that typical unit. So it's really just a bed and a desk and some storage. The interior of the stairwell in the center there, of which the studio building has a similar stair, and then the SRO shared kitchen. So I'll hand it back to Maggie now.
Great. All right, so a bit about our research design and methods. So our overall process is outlined here. There is, we like to think of it as 5 steps. So the first is planning. And for this case study, it was a bit unique because we worked with, we identified the project that we were hoping to study for this particular grant. Ideally, it's a partnership and a joint decision between the developer, building owner, and the architect or the group that's doing the POE. And this helps identify clear goals or objectives for the study to narrow the research design focus. The second phase is data collection. And so since we had the site established, we established some criteria around what type of data we wanted to collect. And we used a mixed methods approach for this. And so that is a mix between qualitative data and quantitative data. So the quantitative data focuses mostly on measuring the building performance, and the qualitative data is measuring the resident experiences and outcomes. And with this, we're able to triangulate the data. For the third phase, it's data analysis, and that's when we code and interpret the data. So if you're not familiar with coding, it's a way to take direct transcripts from the qualitative data that we collected and identify key themes with that the participants identified. And this is a way to look at the data through a unbiased approach, or unbiased as much as possible. And then we take all our data points and we synthesize those. So layer on the qualitative results with the quantitative results. And then from there, we compiled the final report. For this particular grant, the report ended up being more than 100 pages. It's very robust, but I think it's important to note the final reports should be digestible and able to be shared to a larger audience. That is what we see as one of the primary goals of this research. And then dissemination. So like I said, we wanted to share our findings. We should also note that Holst was the architect of record for this project, although Corey and myself did not personally work on the project. It's important to be transparent with all of our findings, whether they're negative or positive. That is how we learn from POEs. So again, this is an overview of the methods that I mentioned prior. So for the quantitative methods, we tested energy use modeling, and then we also placed data loggers. So sensors that measured the indoor environmental quality around the site. For the qualitative data, we conducted a building operator workshop. We did a site walkthrough, and we also held a resident focus group. In the middle there, you'll see that we have the resident survey listed, and this is a combination of scaled questions, so ranking from 1 to 5, and then also open-ended questions to allow residents to provide more details or elaborate on their scaled answers. In all, this is what our process looked like. We ended up taking about 18 months total for the study, and which equated to about 500 hours. All right, so we kicked off the study with a building operator workshop, and this is what we recommend to be the first step for any POE. It's a way to meet with the resident services coordinators or the on-site staff, and ideally the property management team, to understand their perspective of the building and provide an overview and perhaps a glimpse into some areas specifically that we should study. With those site staff and building operator, we did a site walkthrough where it was my first chance personally to tour the buildings and document with photos of different conditions. For the resident engagement, so the survey and the focus groups, this is an overview of the participants. And so the total on-site residents at the time were about 48. And then we had 21 participants between the survey and the focus group, which is a little bit more than 40% participation, which is within the targeted number, so we could capture the bulk of the different demographics that are on site. For the survey, we had 19 participants complete the survey, and we started with a consent form, and then to make sure that everybody who was completing it was 18 years and older, and then to let them know that they would remain, their identity would remain anonymous. We collected basic demographic information, and then we focused on overall satisfaction with the spaces, the IEQ or indoor environmental quality and comfort of the spaces, the perceptions of the building condition, accessibility, and overall use of the spaces, safety, social activity, so connections on site, and then transportation access. We ended up conducting these surveys through in-person events using primarily paper surveys. And I think it's important to note that this was a very different modality than how we've conducted surveys in previous POEs, where we'd often just post a QR code and residents would fill out the surveys online. There's some barriers to the use of or access to phones or computers, and so that wasn't feasible with this resident population. So every Monday morning in March, our team showed up with donuts in the community room and had an open house for the residents to stop by and fill out a paper survey and also chat with us. It's also important to note that everybody who completed a survey received not only donuts and coffee, but they also received a gift card for compensation for their time. The focus group was conducted after the surveys, and we find it's best to conduct the events in this order because a focus group can help elaborate on some of the key themes that we found in the survey responses, but also explain different anomalies in the data that we found. So this took place at the end of the summer. We hosted a barbecue, and we opened up the barbecue for all residents, whether they opted to participate in the focus group or not. One advice that we received from our resident services staff is that when you're coming into people's homes and taking up their time, you want to make sure that you are rewarding them and acknowledging that you're taking up their time and coming into their space. And so that's why we thought it was important to offer a barbecue for everyone, whether they sat in on the focus group following the barbecue or not. The next method we used were through data loggers. And so we had a total of 7 data loggers placed on site, and Corey will elaborate on this a bit more, but it was a combination of placement in units and in common spaces. It's important to keep in mind in terms of the placement that oftentimes the data loggers can be tampered with or taken. So you can't quite tell from this presentation, but Corey is quite tall, and we use that to our advantage to place the centers in higher up locations, like you can see on the top photo there. And we also did energy use modeling to using the monthly electrical and natural gas bills. We were able to model some other scenarios to test different heating, cooling, and ventilation strategies. All right, so for the analysis portion, in the building operator workshop, we always walk away from our conversations with resident services staff just surprised, but also pleased with how invested they are in the overall health and well-being of the residents. And so there's frustration about the amount of time that it took for maintenance concerns to be addressed, and then also some structural issues that the residents were up against that they felt their hands were tied and couldn't quite do anything about. Other than those concerns, there was a sentiment that was echoed throughout our study that the sense of community was very strong on site, both between the residents themselves and the staff and the residents. In the site walkthrough, we made sure to take photos of all spaces and to show, maybe what we saw in one space or one building wasn't necessarily true in another. Like, for example, the photo on the left is a communal kitchen in an SRO building that wasn't quite maintained so well, but on the photo on the right, in contrast, it's an example of a communal kitchen where the residents have really personalized to make it feel like home and with festive holiday decorations. There were many conditions where it showed some wear and tear throughout the buildings. One is the stairway shown here. Another is the doors, and so we see a lot of damage on the doors, and then also the door hardware. And from just photos like these, it makes us reevaluate: is white the best door color, and is there more robust hardware that we can use to prevent tampering with locks? Another photo that really illustrated pride of place is on the left. It's a resident who's tending to his garden that he created outside of his building. And so there's outdoor furniture set up and an area for his dog. A lot of residents have dog, and he shares this with his friends and residents on site. All right, so now for some highlights of the survey data. We always ask just general feedback on overall satisfaction of the buildings. And so you can see here that most residents rank their satisfaction or happiness above average, so 5 stars or 4 stars. And then we dive into specific spaces and resident satisfaction within those spaces. And so overall, a lot of the residents said that the spaces are okay. One area that we wanted to note, though, was the parking area, where no one actually ranked it's the best, and many residents ranked it's the worst. And I think going into the study, we had thought that there's some frustration around the parking area because there's limited spaces. It turns out that residents are able to find ample street parking, or they don't have a vehicle. So that's not the issue. The issue is there's not enough turnaround space for emergency vehicles, which frequent the site. So that was eye-opening to hear. In terms of comfort, specifically the sound, overall, no major concerns. Only a couple folks rated sound the worst, but we found that there's a lot of sound complaints from unit to unit or from the hallway to units. So the sound or noise created by other residents. In terms of feedback about the air quality, we hear a lot that there's extreme dust levels, and this isn't the first property where we've heard that, so concerns from residents consistently about that. In terms of the feedback about temperature, there was a discovery about extreme temperatures in one of the stairwells, which Corey will get into in a bit. But overall, there was concerns about not having AC in units. And we've heard this again echoed in other POEs where resident services coordinators will request that the residents actually open up their unit doors on really hot days to make sure everybody is okay because the temperatures are now getting so extreme. In terms of the spaces and overall use of the spaces, the majority of residents use the primary lobby or community room the most. And this is in the studio building that Corey pointed out earlier. It's a fairly small space. And so this space opens up into a patio, a courtyard area that is also used. But every time we were on site, there were at least 5 to 10 or more residents gathered around chatting or watching a movie or having coffee. The space that is used the least is the bike storage space, which you can see in that bottom photo there. There's an outdoor bike storage structure that I believe just has one bike in there. And we found that a lot of times that residents who have bikes actually like to store them in their units because of their value. In terms of safety, so this one was interesting to us because this is what we had heard a fair amount about through articles that we had read about the site prior to the study. And we did hear some comments about safety concerns, but not necessarily with between residents, but from people coming onto the property. And so there was security on site, or that was implemented on site, that helped the residents' perception with feeling safe. But then we also thought it was interesting that when residents had to rank the individual areas in terms of their feeling unsafe or safe, the majority ranked them as feeling safe. So questions like these, where you kind of have a mixed result and the responses, is a great question or theme to take back into the focus group to understand it better. And then in terms of the social connection, so the connection with other groups on site, mostly folks said they'll socialize sometimes, although they did note in their open-ended questions the importance of the resident services staff on site. So there's a quote there about one of the resident services coordinator, And we just hear over and over again how important they are to the resident experience. And then we also ask just how do you socialize at the building? And I think oftentimes as designers, you make assumptions with how residents or building users are moving through the spaces or using the spaces. And so a simple question like this can kind of test if your assumptions are correct. And then, as mentioned, the resident focus group was a way to dig into some of those questions that where the responses were a bit unclear, or we wanted to learn more about the responses. And there was a lot of talk about not having AC and how that was a concern. Many residents use portable AC units because of that. Concerns again about the stairwell. But overwhelmingly, there is about a 15-minute discussion at the end about the sense of community on site and the frequent get-togethers and events that they all host together, such as barbecues or potlucks for the holidays. Okay.
All right. So to get to the quantitative data that we took via the sensors that Maggie mentioned earlier, I'll just explain all these charts kind of work the same way, where the blue dashed line is the ambient outdoor, either temperature or air quality. So you can see here that we began our data collection in beginning of February, ended it essentially the beginning of October. So you're seeing not quite a full year here, something like over the course of the summer and into the beginning of the fall, so that you can kind of see in the outdoor air temperature kind of that hump for the summer where it gets warmer. The coldest daily average and the coldest instance of the year was on Valentine's Day. The hottest was in August 11th, and 12th were quite hot. And so that's sort of the outdoor ambient stuff. The colored line is the daily average temperature or air quality. And then the shaded region on either side of it is the range, so the highs and lows within that individual day. So you can see here for one of the SRO units in Building A, I believe it was on the ground floor, the temperature over the course of the year rather flat. I believe this person had a portable air conditioner that they used during the summer, which kind of helped keep the interior temperatures at a reasonable level. For one of those SRO units in Building C, this person I know stated that they use their air conditioner quote, all the time. So you can see that their temperatures are a little cooler. They did have a couple of spikes in the spring. I'm guessing it's a particularly sunny day. Yeah, I don't know if there's more to say about that, but their temperature is reasonably cool in this unit. Studio unit, I think this one was on the second floor of the studio building. This one did not have a portable air conditioner. And you can see the corresponding temperatures kind of tracking with the outdoor temperatures over the course of the year, and including a daily average of 85 degrees or a hottest instance of 86 degrees during the summer, so quite warm, which is something we found to be pretty typical amongst affordable housing projects that we've worked on in the past without air conditioning, is some of the units, particularly those on upper floors or with a lot of solar exposure, get quite hot. So nothing terribly out of the ordinary there, although it can be uncomfortable. So this is one of the shared kitchens in one of the SRO buildings. This was rather surprising. There is cooling in the corridors, although not in the units. The mechanical system in the kitchen is essentially just exhaust only as well. But this room gets rather hot. It stays rather hot pretty much all year. Although, I was there, it doesn't feel as hot as the temperature indicates. I don't know if it's a mean radiant temperature thing, but the sensor is indicating that it's quite warm over the course of the year. The building lobby, so this is that common space that Maggie was talking about that's really well used. There's always people in there playing games or watching TV or chatting. One thing that we found is the doors are often held open. And if you recall the site plan, there's sort of an outdoor shared terrace just outside of that. Those doors are often pinned open during the year, which, it's kind of surprising that the temperature kind of remained as stable as it is, simply because the doors, like double doors, are open a lot. I would have expected that the temperature track more closely with the outdoor temperature. It does have cooling, so on particularly hot days, I'm sure that the doors were closed and the air conditioning was running, so that kind of accounts for like the August 11th, where it was 102 degrees outside, but about 80 degrees inside. So nothing terribly surprising other than some of these really hot instances, particularly, I think it's, in March, it's unaccounted for. Maggie had mentioned the stair. So this sensor was on the second floor of the southwest facing stair in the studio building, which has, oh, have we lost our screen share? Oh, there it is. Strange. Okay. So in this chart, you can see the temperature sensor reading for that sensor in the second floor of the southwest facing stair. If you recall the photographs, there's a large 3-story tall polycarbonate wall facing southwest that allows a lot of solar gain, I think more so than the design team expected. Here you can see the really wide swings daily, and you can essentially identify when there's a sunny day because the temperature spikes quite a lot. And the space itself is not heated or cooled. There's an exhaust fan at the top, and the intent was that that exhaust fan would run. It's set by a thermostat. That exhaust fan would run when the temperature gets above a certain point and kind of exhaust out the hot air, or at least as much as possible, given it's drawing exterior air in, and if it's 100 degrees outside, it's pulling in a 100-degree air. However, because of that solar gain, the indoor temperatures get quite hot, including a hottest indoor instance of 126 degrees. So we are currently working with the owner, property manager, and the contractor to find ways to address this because it is quite concerningly hot. This is daily AQI. So AQI is essentially particulate measurement and a few other pollutants. And the range here, 0 is obviously clean air, and as you go higher up the chart, it becomes less and less healthy. So you can kind of see the graduations in colors between good, moderate, and then the unhealthy for sensitive groups is people with respiratory issues, asthma, and the like. So you want to try to stay out of that range for those folks. The dark line is one of the kitchens, the same shared SRO kitchen as the temperature sensor was in. And there's a lot of reasons that sensor might be reading a rather poor air quality. It's a shared kitchen. There could be a lot of cooking. Somebody might have been burning something at some of those particularly spiking points. But also there was, and this is common too for the lighter gray line, which is the shared common space. We also had an air quality sensor in there. There is a lot of use of air fresheners in and around the property to kind of mask odors. And I think that the air quality sensor is picking a lot of that up. So essentially those odors are particulates in the air that are intended to smell good, but it does indicate unhealthy air quality when a machine is sensing it. Another thing we did was place a CO2 sensor in one of the units. This is that studio second floor unit that we had the temperature readings for. In this case, we're using CO2 as sort of a proxy to determine how effective the exhaust-only ventilation system is in terms of keeping the CO2 levels manageable. On this scale, the typical outdoor range is in the 400s, sometimes ranging up to 600. So you can see that between the dashed lines at the bottom. The recommended values, like the maximum values for interior air CO2, kind of depends on who you ask, but one rule of thumb is try to keep it below 1,000 parts per million. ASHRAE actually has a recommendation of keeping it, I think it was something like 700 above no more than 700 ppm above the ambient outdoor air quality. So you can kind of see those ranges here. Generally, this unit stayed within the recommended ranges. There were a few peaks, which could be a lot of things. It could be the guests that overwhelmed the exhaust system's capability of exhausting the air fast enough. Also, you'll notice that at one peak in April, it kind of stayed high after that. And we're not exactly sure why that might be, although it's been speculated perhaps that person got a pet or something. And then just the extra, respiration in the unit might be causing slightly elevated yellows levels. But generally, it's staying below. The daily average is almost always below the recommended levels. So that was good to see. The other thing that we did was an energy model, and this was sort of a multi-step process. Because we had actual verified energy bills from 2022 from prior study, and then we collected them again for 2025, I was able to use a Climate Studio, which is a plugin to Rhino, to model the property, essentially do an as-built of that, compare it to the actual energy use, and then fine-tune that model to try to match the observed results as closely as possible. So the out-of-the-box model assumes certain things for occupancy, assumes certain things about the way the building is being used, and I was able to try to tweak that to try to match what we observed as closely as possible. There are anomalous results, like in 2022, there's a huge spike in electrical use in July. I'm not sure why that was. There's no data to kind of indicate why that might be, but just generally, we were able to fine-tune that model to, essentially produce results within like 2% of the actual observed results. So what are those results? At the top here, you can see sort of the baseline expected EUI, and EUI is effectively just like a miles per gallon for a building. That's a way to compare apples to apples between building types. Housing is, the baselines, for this usage around 60. What we observed in the yellow there is somewhat below that at 52.2. So that was encouraging to see that it's below what would be expected for a building of this vintage and this level of occupancy. So it's performing well. The modeled energy use in the purple there was my attempt to try to match that exact as closely as possible, and I got it to 51.2. So one thing that we were curious about, and this is sort of outside the range of a normal POE, and because we were the design architect and because we're interested in finding out how the building could be improved, we speculated, well, what if, there's complaints about cooling in the summer, the building being uncomfortable when it's hot outside. What if we were to augment the building with mini split air conditioners? And the result of that would be, enhanced comfort in the summer, but slightly more energy use. So the mini splits would take the place of the electric resistance heat and then provide cooling in the summer. So the energy use increases in the summer, but decreases in the winter because the mini splits are much more effective at heating, efficient than heating than the electric resistance heaters. So overall, pretty net even move on energy, but better comfort over the course of the year. The next step was those mini splits with heat recovery ventilators in lieu of exhaust-only ventilation. And because the exhaust-only ventilation in the winter is essentially just blowing heat out of the building, it's not a terribly efficient way to ventilate the building. The HRVs are, if you're not familiar, they draw in outside air, blow out the exhaust air from inside the building, but in that process, they exchange the heat. So it's conserving energy that way. So the overall result of that would be better comfort in the summer, equal comfort in the winter, and a decrease in overall energy use, and presumably better ventilation as well. To address the stair, one thing that we were thinking about was, well, there's essentially a big solar solar heat gain factory there. What if we tried to shield that from the sun by a couple of different schemes for shading that window? Also, we're looking at like what happens if we air condition it. So In the yellow upper left is the baseline and what the energy model predicts that temperature to be, which is well over 100 degrees. If we try different shading schemes, it does help a little bit with the overall heat gain, but not terribly. It's still quite warm in there. So the next step would be like, what if we added cooling? So the lower left there is no shading, adding cooling. So instead of 3.5 EUI of the baseline, which is essentially just lights and that fan, the energy use of that space increases dramatically, but the temperatures get under control. And then if you combine the most successful shading strategy with that cooling, the temperatures are even better, the energy use decreases. So nothing surprising, but it is rather interesting to kind of explore the possibilities of what could happen there. Like I said, we're working on a solution to help mitigate those temperatures, but these were interesting experiments along that process.
All right. So I hope you all are doing okay. A lot of data there that we shared, but we just wanted to summarize our key findings through both the qualitative and quantitative data. So first of all, through our coding of the qualitative data, we identified 4 key themes. So these are the themes or subjects that came up the most in terms of the survey and focus group. So comfort, safety, maintenance, and connection, social connection. For comfort, as we just discussed, there's concern about high summer temperatures and the lack of AC in units. So we heard that from both the resident services staff and also the residents themselves. As mentioned, there's also a fair amount of internal noise concerns. It seems like more from noisier tenants and fellow residents. And then there's air quality and odor concerns. So some concerns about the air freshener smell that Corey noted, and then also some pet odors on site as well. For safety concerns, trespassing and break-ins were the primary concern there, and we have tried to confront these challenges with now bringing on the hardware consultant earlier and really looking at different hardware that is more tamper-proof. Because we've heard that from not just this site, but other sites as well. There is also a concern with the single stair egress in the SRO buildings. So again, this is hearing this feedback challenges that us in terms of thinking that what may be allowed per code might not be the best in terms of a resident experience. There are sentiments that because of the single stair egress that residents felt trapped and if there is ever an emergency. In terms of maintenance concerns, there was a delay in responses from for maintenance issues on site in general. There's broken appliances in the common spaces that, again, took some time to replace or repair. And then as mentioned in terms of safety, some overlap there with the damaged doors and locks. In terms of connection, again, it's always heartwarming to hear the sentiments about the importance of community on site and the events that the residents hold and facilitate together. And so having an ample amount of space for those, and then also ensuring that the FF&E that's chosen isn't institutional feeling or looking. And so balancing FF&E that's durable, but also feels like home. And then there's also a strong sense of ownership and pride in place in the building floor, within the building floors, particularly of the SRO buildings. So for example, like the shared kitchen area that was decorated for the holidays, we saw that again and again when we go into the buildings. And then the public transit access as well. We heard a lot from residents about their trip time in order to go to a grocery store or go to their doctor's appointments or go to work. And it's important to hear these perspectives to really understand the residents and their daily experiences.
In terms of the takeaways for the quantitative stuff, excuse me, I meant to mention the stairways repeatedly. Like I said, the exhaust-only ventilation isn't really doing the job, and so we're working on a solution for that, including essentially letting more outdoor air into the space. I found that mini splits can be added with minimal energy impact and increase the comfort of the building. And then the exhaust-only ventilation seems to be doing an adequate job, but maybe not the most energy efficient way to ventilate the building.
All right. So real quickly, this is just a snapshot of a framework document that we've included in that link or QR code, I believe, that's available for everyone to review the recommendations for how to approach a POE, the amount of time it takes for each phase, and then recommendations for the actual methods themselves. And so you'll see here that we have suggested a POE light, and so that's primarily qualitative data. And so those can be completed, those engagement events can be completed fairly quickly. I will note that the importance with this POE light is that the resident services staff are willing to help out as liaisons. And so again, I think I've mentioned this quite a few times now that they are so important as a liaison and working with the residents. Also, if you feel as an architect or someone who isn't trained in research, that you can always ask one of the case managers or resident services coordinators to facilitate the focus group for you, and that they can ensure to avoid any questions that might be triggering or sensitive to the resident population. The POE standard approach is basically what we shared here. So it's a combination of the qualitative and quantitative data. It, of course, takes more time and resources, but this is where you can actually hear the resident perceptions and also evaluate the building performance data and see if there's a correlation between the two. I'll also mention that we have included some optional methods. So photo mapping is a great tool to use for residents who have better access to phones or cameras, and it's a way for them to take photos of their experiences on site or different maintenance concerns, building conditions, and then share those photos in a focus group setting. And then point-in-time data loggers is a way to take snapshots of the data rather than having the or snapshots of the indoor environmental quality, I should say, rather than having a data logger in place for 6 months or more like we had. This could be used for shorter study durations. And then also the energy use modeling, as Corey mentioned, we included it here in this study, but this is supplemental to standard POEs. And I think part of the challenge with the POE is when you do find a building condition such as the stairwell, as designers and architects, we not only have an interest to investigate further, but a sense of obligation. So it is something to note that drawing a line on where the POE starts and then where design starts again is a fine line and a tricky balance that you have to find. All right, so with that, we'll be hopefully presenting this at conferences, both locally and nationally. We'll sharing the report and the framework document online for everyone to use as a resource. And then our goal in this is really to, as mentioned, share our findings, and whether those are positive or negative, the point of a POE is to challenge ourselves as designers and architects, and also partner with the larger affordable housing and development community to improve the status quo design process.